The forest did not begin with the war. Long before soldiers marched through Europe, before the symbols of the Reich were carved into stone, before maps of the Harz region were printed in gray military ink, the locals whispered about a place where the nights never behaved like nights should. A stretch of ancient spruce and granite ridges, where shadows seemed to have their own pulse, and where people vanished without a sound. The Allied patrol didn't know any of this on the morning they stepped inside. They only knew the coordinates. And the fog. The mist lay low across the forest floor, a white, breathing sheet. At first, it looked like ordinary mountain fog, cold, damp, indifferent. But the deeper the soldiers moved, the more it thickened, as if it wasn't drifting from the valley, but rising from the ground itself. Sergeant Miller halted, raising a fist. "Listen," he whispered. No one spoke. No one even breathed too loudly. But the forest wasn't quiet. Leaves rustled, though there was no wind. Branches scraped against one another like old bones. And somewhere behind them, too far to see, too close to ignore, came the faint echo of footsteps, not matching theirs. Private Dawson glanced back. "Someone's tailing us." "Cut it out," Lieutenant Harris muttered, checking his map again, even though the compass needle had begun to twitch, nudging left, then right, as if unable to decide what north meant anymore. "There's no one out here except us." But no one believed that. The Harz Forest pressed in from all sides. Tall pines leaned overhead like a vaulted ceiling, sealing the sky. Even daylight couldn't fully enter. It broke apart into scattered silver fragments that died before touching the ground. The air was colder now, wet, heavy. Miller stepped forward, squinting. "Did you see that?" "See what?" Dawson asked. "There, between the trees." The patrol followed his gaze. For a heartbeat, less, a figure stood between two trunks, motionless, cloaked in something dark, maybe a coat, maybe something older. A shape, not a person, a presence. And then, as the fog rolled, it was gone. Harris exhaled slowly, as if forcing logic down his own throat. Probably a hunter, or a stray civilian. No civilian dresses like that, Miller said. But he kept walking because stopping would have been worse. Because standing still in that kind of silence felt like asking the forest a question. And none of them wanted to hear the answer. They continued forward, boots sinking into moss, and the sound of their steps echoed strangely. Not around them, but ahead of them, as if someone was walking where they were about to walk, every footfall delayed by half a second. It didn't make sense. Nothing here made sense. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to rearrange itself. Trees they passed a moment ago appeared again on their left. Fallen logs changed places. The ground dipped in unnatural indentations, as if something enormous had once coiled there. And the fog. The fog was no longer fog. It was a veil, a threshold, a warning. Private Dawson touched Miller's sleeve. "Sergeant, I don't like this place." Miller didn't answer immediately. His eyes tracked the shifting mist, the trees that looked too still, the silence that felt engineered. Finally, he said very quietly, "No one likes a place that watches back." Ahead, a faint silhouette of stone appeared. The first sign of what their orders described as an abandoned outpost, possibly of strategic interest. Harris checked the map again. "This is it. We're close to the coordinates." But, as they approached, they realized the structure wasn't a simple outpost. It wasn't any kind of shelter, bunker, or warehouse they'd ever seen. It was a doorway cut into the earth. Granite walls marked with symbols no one wanted to decipher. The fog curled around it like something returning home. And for the first time since entering the forest, Sergeant Miller felt a thought that didn't belong to him slide through the back of his mind. Turn back, now, before it sees you. But he stepped forward anyway. Because the worst horrors in war are always the ones you discover too late. The doorway swallowed sound. The moment the patrol crossed the threshold, the forest behind them went mute, as if someone had pressed a hand over the mouth of the world. No wind, no birds, no distant echo of boots on pine needles, just the brittle crackle of their own breathing under steel helmets. A narrow corridor descended into the earth, carved from rough granite, dripping with cold moisture. Rusted lamps hung from hooks overhead, long dead. Their flashlights cut weak cones through the darkness, catching flecks of dust suspended in the air like ash. Miller ran a gloved hand across the wall. "Not a mine," he murmured. "Too deliberate, too clean." Harris nodded. "This must be the facility mentioned in the briefing. Experimental station. Garz-IV." Private Dawson squinted at the metal plaque beside the entrance. Half rusted, half scratched out. A few letters remained. A HNEN, RBENACHTKREIS, PROJEKT. Dawson frowned. "What language is that?" "German," Harris said quietly. "But the second part? That means Night Circle Project." The words felt wrong in his mouth. As they moved deeper, the corridor widened into a circular chamber. Their lights revealed long tables overturned in disarray, shattered glass vials, torn pages soaked in old water. A metal frame stood in the corner, shaped like a half-finished ring. Wires dangling, copper coils charred at the edges. But the center of the room was what made Miller stop breathing. A large stone circle, carved directly into the floor. Perfect geometry. Deep, cold grooves forming runes and intersecting lines. Blackened scorch marks radiated outward, as if something explosive had erupted from its heart. Dawson whispered, "Jesus, this looks like a ritual." "It looks like physics," Harris said defensively, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "Some kind of field generator, a prototype. The Nazis were experimenting with everything at this point." Miller knelt and touched the grooves. They weren't scorched. They were burned from within, as if heat had risen through the stone instead of settling on top of it. He pulled his hand back fast. Something about the circle felt alive. On the wall beside it hung a set of sketches, pinned with old nails, symbols arranged in spirals, measurements in German, angles and curves that didn't resemble any known scientific diagrams. And in the corner of each page, a date, February 1945, last phase. Beneath it, written in an elegant hand, Die Nacht ist ein Tor, der Wald ist der Führer. Night is a gate. The forest is the guide. A cold ripple crept down Dawson's spine. "Sir, I think they believed this place opened something." Harris shook his head. "They believed in all kinds of nonsense. Occultism, ancestral visions, Aryan mythology. It doesn't mean any of it worked." Miller wasn't convinced. He scanned the room again, the ring device, the burned stone, the scattered notes, and noticed something else. On the ground, half hidden under debris, lay a leather-bound notebook. He picked it up. The cover was embossed with initials, O.H. Obersturmführer Hagen. Inside, the first pages were filled with neat handwriting, observations, dates, procedural logs. But the tone changed the deeper he read. March 3rd, 1945. The forest reacts. It bends to our efforts. The air thickens when the circle is activated. Shadows form geometric patterns I cannot explain. March 7th. One of the subjects claims he hears voices when standing inside the circle. He described them as older than men. March 9th. It followed us. Last night, near the tree line, we saw a figure with no flashlight. It stood perfectly still. It vanished when approached. Dawson swallowed. "Sir, this is insane." Miller closed the book carefully, as if afraid to wake something sleeping inside it. "It gets worse," he said quietly. Last entry. He opened to the final page. March 12th. They are not shadows. They are witnesses. The forest is not a location. It is a threshold, and it has begun to notice us. Tonight, We will activate the circle at full capacity. If we fail, the forest will take everything back, including us. Underneath, smeared as if written in panic, "Wir hören Schritte in den Wänden." We hear footsteps inside the walls. The chamber suddenly felt smaller, heavier, the kind of place that remembers everyone who steps inside. Dawson lifted his flashlight again. "Sergeant, look." On the far wall, etched deep into the stone, was a silhouette. Tall, hooded, arms extended slightly, like someone captured in the act of stepping forward. Except the carving was fresh, sharper than everything else in the room, as if added long after the war, or not carved at all, but pressed into the rock by something solid, something real. Harris stepped back. "Okay, enough sightseeing. We mark it for intel. We leave." But the forest had other plans. From somewhere above, or beneath, came a sound. A long, low groan, like stone shifting under the weight of something enormous. Then another. Then footsteps, inside the walls. And every flashlight flickered at once. The footsteps inside the walls didn't stop. They multiplied. At first, the soldiers tried to explain them. Loose stone, shifting earth, underground water. But none of those things walk. None of them pause as if listening. None follow the exact rhythm of human steps, mimicking them just slightly out of sync, like an echo that refuses to behave. Miller tightened his grip on his rifle. "All right," he whispered. "We're pulling out. Stay close, stay quiet, and don't fall behind." But when they turned back toward the entrance corridor, the air felt different, heavier, thicker. The mist that had seeped into the bunker clung to their boots now, swirling around their legs like living breath. Harris swallowed. "Sergeant, did we leave that door open?" The metal door at the entrance, a heavy slab of reinforced steel, now stood half-closed. They had forced it open earlier with effort, the rusted hinges screaming. But now it had shifted inward on its own, as if pushed by a steady, deliberate hand. "Dawson," Miller said, "help me with it." But as they approached, something on the surface of the door caught their attention. Long scratches, deep, parallel grooves, ran across the metal. Not random, not accidental. 5 lines, evenly spaced, like claw marks or fingers. Dawson backed away. Nope. Something was in here." "We're not staying to ask what," Miller said. He braced his shoulder against the door and shoved. It scraped loudly, resisting at first, then relenting with a heavy moan that echoed through the bunker like a wounded animal. When they finally forced it open, cold air rushed in, but not the kind they were expecting. The forest outside was no longer just fog. It was twilight, impossible twilight. They had entered the bunker at noon. The sun had been pale but visible overhead. Now the world beyond the doorway looked like late evening, muted light dripping through the trees, shadows stretching long and thin, as if the day had bled out while they were underground. Dawson checked his watch. "Sir, it still says 12:43. The forest disagreed. A chill swept over them as they stepped out. Every sound, even their breathing, felt muffled, almost censored. They were being watched, and not in the metaphorical sense soldiers often felt in combat zones. This was sterner, older, as if the forest itself had eyes. Miller led them a few meters from the bunker before stopping to orient. "Compass?" he asked. The compass needle spun again, trembling, then froze, pointing toward the bunker they had just left. "That's not north," Harris said. "I know what north is, Lieutenant," Miller snapped. They tried another compass. Same result. Finally, Harris pulled out the radio, adjusting dials. "Command, this is Recon Team Bravo, located at grid..." Static. He tried again. Nothing but a low, pulsing hum, like breath hitting the microphone. "We're blind," Harris whispered. And deaf, Dawson added. I can't hear birds anymore. I can't hear anything. They moved deeper into the trees, trying to retrace their steps. But the forest had changed. Trees they had passed earlier no longer stood where they should. Familiar roots were gone. Fallen logs had shifted positions. The landscape felt rearranged, redesigned by something with no interest in human navigation. The fog thickened again, not drifting, rising. It gathered around them like a veil pulled over their eyes, turning every direction identical. Miller kept scanning for landmarks, but all he saw were endless trunks and branching shadows. Then the whispers began. Soft at first, a faint rustling, like leaves brushing one another. But the air was still. There was no wind to blame. Harz froze. Did you hear that? Miller nodded slowly. Yes, but Dawson didn't. He heard something else, more distinct, more personal. Evan? The name escaped him in a broken whisper. What did you say? Miller asked sharply. Dawson's face had gone pale beneath the dirt. He stared into the fog, eyes wide and unfocused. My brother. I heard my brother. Your brother's dead, Dawson, Harz said, not unkindly. Killed in Normandy. I know that, Dawson snapped. But I heard him. He said my name. Miller grabbed the private's shoulder. We keep moving, and no one listens to the forest. Understood? But Dawson didn't answer. His eyes drifted toward the shifting fog again, drawn to something only he could see. Miller forced him forward, keeping him close. The whispers grew louder. Not just leaves, voices, fragmented words. Not English, not German. Something older, rolling through the fog like a chant, half swallowed by the earth. Harz shivered. I think it's the echo of the wind in the valley. There is no wind, Miller said. And then they heard something that erased all doubt. Footsteps, crunching, slow and deliberate, not directly behind them. Miller spun around, rifle raised. Nothing, just fog. But the footsteps continued, circling them, pacing them, never visible, always one step behind. The pattern was wrong. Not quadruped, not biped, not anything recognizable. Too heavy, too uneven, too intentional. The men tightened formation, backs almost touching. Sergeant, Harz whispered, we're being hunted. No, Miller murmured, we're being herded. They pressed on, but the fog thickened to the point where the trees were no more than silhouettes. Miller counted the soldiers repeatedly, 1, 2, 3, 4, because the forest felt eager to make them lose track. Dawson! He called suddenly. The private didn't answer. He wasn't in formation. Dawson! Harz yelled, panic cracking through his voice. They scanned the fog, flashlights slicing through gray nothing. The beam caught a shape in the distance, vaguely human, standing still between two trees. Dawson, move! But the figure didn't move. It stood perfectly still, too still. Miller raised his rifle. Harz followed. They approached slowly, boots sinking into damp soil. The fog swirled around the figure, revealing clearer edges, a uniform, a helmet. And then the fog peeled back just enough to reveal the truth. It wasn't Dawson. It wasn't anyone alive. A German soldier, long dead, propped upright against the tree by roots that had grown around his limbs like skeletal hands. Empty eye sockets stared through them. His jaw hung open in a frozen scream. Moss grew from his ribcage, filling what remained of his uniform. Harz staggered back. Oh God, oh God! Miller stepped forward cautiously. Roots didn't grow like this overnight. This body is decades old. He stopped. Something cold and metallic glinted on the corpse's helmet. A symbol. A black sun. He felt the chill run through him. This soldier hadn't died here. He had been placed here, or absorbed. The forest groaned, a slow, deep shudder through the ground that vibrated in their boots. The trees seemed to lean closer. their branches creaking like old wooden jaws. "We need to go," Miller said. "Now." But Harris stared at the corpse, transfixed. "Sergeant, look at his boots." The boots were pointed inward, not outward, as if the soldier had been walking backward when he died, as if he'd been dragged by something pulling him into the forest, heels digging grooves in the dirt that the moss had long since swallowed. A branch snapped behind them, loud, close. They spun together, but the fog swallowed the sound instantly. "Dawson!" Miller shouted again. "Sound off!" Silence. Then, faintly, from somewhere deeper in the woods. "Miller," Dawson's voice. But it didn't sound right. It stretched unnaturally, like someone repeating the sound without understanding human speech. The syllables were too slow, too careful. A mimicry, not a cry for help. "Miller, help," Harris swore under his breath. "That's not him. That's not Dawson." The forest shifted again, not physically but perceptually. The trees seemed to realign themselves. Shadows shifted. Paths appeared where none had been. The fog curled in tendrils, forming soft shapes that dissolved when approached. Miller forced his fear into the pit of his stomach. "We keep looking, but no one, I repeat, no one, breaks formation." They moved through the trees again. More, cautiously now, flashlights sweeping, rifles raised. But the deeper they went, the more distorted the forest became. Sounds stretched, shadows elongated. The air felt thinner, heavier, colder. Then they found Dawson, or what was left of him. It wasn't a body. It wasn't even remains. It was his rifle, standing upright in the soil, perfectly vertical, balanced at an impossible angle. And wrapped around the barrel, tied into a tight knot, was his dog tag. Harris stepped back, shaking his head violently. "No, no, this is some kind of a message." "A warning," Miller said softly. The forest around them rustled, not with wind but with movement. Something large, many of them. Shapes gliding behind trees, too fast to track. Not animals, not human. "Back to the bunker," Miller ordered. "We regroup there." "But the bunker is where—" "It's the only structure we have." They turned back, or what they believed was back, and marched quickly. But the forest no longer obeyed geometry. Paths folded in on themselves. Trees multiplied. The fog thickened until each soldier could barely see the man ahead. Minutes stretched into a half hour into an hour. The bunker never appeared. Instead, they stumbled into a clearing none of them recognized. In the center stood a stone monolith, tall, cracked, covered in symbols identical to those inside the bunker. But one symbol had been freshly carved, a circle, with a vertical line bisecting it, a rune for gateway. Miller approached the stone slowly, heart pounding. Etched below the symbol, in English, perfect, deliberate English, were 5 words: "We see you now, soldier." The forest exhaled. The fog swirled violently, forming spirals around the monolith. The ground trembled. Something approached, not one thing, but many. Their footsteps synchronized, heavy, deliberate, closing in from all directions. Harris raised his rifle. "Sergeant, please tell me this is a hallucination." Miller didn't answer, because hallucinations don't leave footprints. And he could see them now, dozens, maybe hundreds, forming in the soil around the clearing. Bare footprints, human-sized, fresh, and moving, dragging forward, as if something invisible was walking toward them through the fog. The footprints kept moving, not fast, not slow, but steady, as though the unseen walkers had no need to rush. Like they already knew, the soldiers had nowhere else to go. Miller pulled Harris and the others into a tight formation, rifles outward, backs nearly touching. "Eyes up! Don't fire unless you see a target. And don't answer if something calls your name." They didn't question him. They had learned. The fog thickened until the forest dissolved entirely. Even the tall spruce outlines disappeared. The world shrank down to a shimmering circle of gray, barely a dozen feet across. Beyond it, everything was void. For a moment, they stood in a perfect silence, breath trembling in the cold. Then the footsteps stopped. Completely. And the quiet that followed was worse. A choking stillness, a held breath. Then, from somewhere inside the fog, a whisper. Not a voice, not quite. It came like air being drawn between teeth. Soft, slithering, uncertain in shape, but unmistakably aware. Harris shuddered. "Sergeant, it's close." "It's all around us," Miller whispered. The fog rippled, a slow ripple, like fabric shaking. Then something stepped into view. A silhouette. Human-sized, but wrong. The proportions were off. The neck too long, the shoulders too narrow, the limbs too straight. No detail. No face. Just a dark form unmoving in the fog. The men raised their rifles instantly, but the silhouette did not advance. It simply stood there, watching. Then another appeared behind it, then a third, then four more. Harris's voice cracked. "Sir, they're surrounding us." Miller counted 10 shapes, then 12, then more, until the fog was full of them. Silent watchers, lining the clearing like an audience waiting for a performance to begin. Yet, they never moved. Only observed. "What do they want?" Harris whispered. Miller whispered back, "To see what we do next." Then, cutting through the tension like a scalpel, "Sergeant Miller." A voice, clear, calm, male, familiar. Dawson's voice. But not Dawson. The tone was too even, too precise. Missing the warmth, the imperfections, the human cracks in sound. It was Dawson's voice the same way a mask is a face, close enough to recognize, wrong enough to dread. "Don't respond," Miller said without turning. The voice came again, softer, coaxing. "Miller, come with me, it's safe." The silhouettes did not speak, but the fog whispered again, echoing his name in the same, stretched, inhuman cadence. Harris trembled so violently, Miller could feel it through his gear. "Sergeant, if we stay here, we die." "If we run," Miller said, "we also die, so think, what haven't we tried?" The fog pulsed, a slow inhalation. The monolith behind them vibrated faintly, as though resonating with something beneath the soil. The runes etched into it glowed, barely visible but undeniably brighter than before. "A circle," Miller said. "A gateway." And then he remembered. Hagen's last entry. "The forest is a threshold, and it has begun to notice us. Thresholds don't just trap, they open." Miller made a decision. We moved toward the monolith. The men stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. "You want us to go toward the thing that's glowing?" Harris hissed. But he followed, because the alternative, stepping toward the silhouettes, felt like volunteering for something much worse. They moved slowly, carefully. Each step toward the monolith tightened the ring of fog around them, as if the forest itself resisted the choice. Closer, closer. The glowing runes grew brighter. The ground beneath them thrummed, a deep bass vibration, almost musical, almost like a heartbeat. The monolith radiated a strange cold, like stone that had never known sunlight. Then the silhouettes moved. Not all at once, not quickly, but subtly. One step forward, synchronized, silent. One step, as if warning, "Don't." The soldiers froze. Harris whispered, "Sergeant, they're telling us not to go to it." But Miller wasn't convinced. "Or they're trying to make sure we never reach whatever escapes through it." The fog roiled, swirling rapidly around the monolith, coiling around their boots like tethering vines. The vibration intensified. The runes began to shift, not glowing, but rearranging, lines bending and reconnecting as if alive. "What's happening to the stone?" Harz asked. "It's responding," Miller said. "To what?" "To us being here, or to them." The silhouettes advanced again. Another synchronized step. No sound. No shaking of the ground. No footprints. Just motion. Slow, unstoppable motion. Harz raised his rifle. "Sir, I'm warning you. If they get any closer." "No firing!" Miller snapped. "We don't know what they are. We don't know what bullets do to them." "We don't know what they do to us!" Harz shouted, panic rising. The silhouettes froze, as though listening. And then, horrifyingly, one of them imitated Harris's last word. "Us." Long, drawn out, inhuman. Mimicry again. Too accurate, too deliberate. The men recoiled, and then the forest made its move. A wind rose, cold, cutting, swirling in tight circles around the clearing. The fog lifted off the ground like a spiraling column, wrapping the monolith in a cocoon of gray. The runes flared white, and from deep within, the stone came a sound. A low groan. Like something pushing through. Something old. Something wrong. The vibration spread beneath their boots. The earth, humming, shifting, remembering. The fog exploded outward in a shockwave, throwing the men backward. Miller hit the ground hard, ears ringing. Something cracked. A tree? A bone? He couldn't tell. Silhouettes stepped forward again. Too close now. Far too close. Within arm's reach. Harz scrambled to his knees. "Sergeant, permission to fire, permission!" A silhouette leaned down toward him. And for the first time, Miller saw something in the fog. Not a face. A void. Darkness shaped like a face. Eyes of absolute blackness. A mouth too wide, too thin, stretching as if the fog itself were skin. Harz screamed. Fired. The bullet tore through the silhouette, ripping a hole through fog. But there was no blood. No fall. No physical impact. The hole sealed itself immediately, like smoke swallowing a wound. The silhouette tilted its head, slowly, curiously, and reached toward Harz. Its hand was not a hand. It was a branch, a root, a tendril of living fog. It touched Harris's helmet. And everything changed. Harris's scream choked off. His eyes rolled white. His limbs stiffened. The fog around him tightened, pulled, wrapped around his arms as though testing the shape of him. Miller lunged forward, grabbing Harz by the vest. "Let him go!" But the fog pulled harder. Harris's boots dragged twin grooves in the soil. The silhouette didn't move, but the fog moved with purpose, dragging Harz toward the tree line, toward the deeper forest. "No!" Miller roared. He fought, pulling with all the strength left in his body. But Harz wasn't being dragged anymore. He was being absorbed. The fog wrapped around him, pulling him into the silhouette like a garment being worn. His scream became their whisper. His shadow merged with theirs. Harz was gone, just gone, swallowed. Miller stumbled backward, horrified. "Sergeant," one of the men whispered, "we can't win. We can't fight that." The silhouettes advanced, slow, steady, inevitable. Miller made another decision, the kind men make only when they know they'll die otherwise. "We go into the circle." "What? Are you insane?" "We go into the circle now. Move!" They sprinted toward the monolith as the fog surged behind them. The vibration beneath the soil reached a fever pitch. The runes blazed blue-white. The stone pulsed. Miller grabbed the remaining men and shoved them toward the glowing lines drawn on the ground around the monolith. An echo of the circle they'd seen in the bunker. Footsteps thundered from behind. The silhouettes closed in. The fog screamed. The forest trembled. Miller stepped into the circle. And the world broke open. A flash of blinding white engulfed the clearing. A sound like tearing fabric ripped through the air, cosmic, ancient, deafening. The silhouettes halted, frozen mid-step, as if held back by an invisible wall. The fog recoiled violently, swirling outward like smoke in reverse. The ground beneath the soldiers dissolved into light. Everything fell away. The forest, the fog, the silhouettes, the monolith. All of it vanished into a white void. And then, as suddenly as it began, the light collapsed. Darkness swallowed them again. But it wasn't the same darkness. It was deeper, colder, empty. Miller blinked. A new forest surrounded them, similar to the Harz. But not the Harz. The trees were twisted. The ground was blackened. The air was still, completely still. And the fog. The fog was thicker than ever. But it wasn't hunting them now. It was waiting. As if they had crossed the threshold the forest wanted all along. Miller whispered into the void. "Where are we?" A whisper answered from the fog, using Dawson's voice, Harris's voice, voices of men long dead. Home. For a long time, none of them spoke. The new forest, if it could even be called that, seemed to lean inward, listening. Not a single branch moved. Not one leaf trembled. The air felt thick as syrup, heavy enough that every breath seemed to drag through their lungs like wet cloth. Miller scanned the tree line. It went on forever, and yet felt claustrophobic, as if the trees pressed against a space too small for them. Private Langley swallowed hard. "Sir, this isn't Germany." "No," Miller said quietly. "It's not." The soil beneath them was black, not burned, not volcanic, but dead. Crushed bone powder, fine as ash. Their boots left crisp prints, which was the only sign this place accepted their presence physically. A low hum vibrated through the air. Not sound. More like a pulse, a heartbeat. Something vast, buried beneath the earth, or beneath the fabric of the world itself. "Sergeant," Langley whispered. "The fog. It's watching us." And it was. The fog formed walls, tall, shifting, almost architectural. Not drifting naturally, but rising purposefully, shaping corridors and angles, guiding them like livestock toward an unseen destination. "This is a maze," Miller said. "A living maze." They didn't choose a direction. The fog chose one for them. A narrow path opened, straight as a blade. The only way forward. Miller nodded. "We move, slow, weapons ready." They walked, step by step. Each footfall echoed too loudly, as if the earth wanted to memorize the sound. The fog pressed close to their shoulders, whispering with 1,000 thin voices. Not words, not language, but the sensation of being studied. After several minutes, or hours, time was wrong here, Langley whispered, "Sir, does the sky look different to you?" Miller looked up. It wasn't sky. Where the heavens should have been, the forest canopy opened into a vast, swirling mass of dark clouds. But they weren't clouds at all. They were shapes, figures, outlines of bodies drifting like smoke, fused into the atmosphere. Hundreds, thousands, layered in silent motion. Every so often a face, pale, eyeless, stretched, would press outward from the haze as if pushing against an invisible barrier, and then slide back into the mass. Langley dropped to his knees, gagging. Miller grabbed him. "Don't look up, don't look too long." How do we leave?" the private sobbed. "We find the way back." "Back to what, Sergeant?" Langley cried. Miller had no answer. The fog hallway tightened. The trees bent inward, unnaturally, their bark cracking with soft pops. Branches braided themselves overhead, knitting into something like a ceiling. The forest wasn't just alive. It was aware and evolving. The men descended into a shallow basin where the soil changed color, from ash gray to a dark, wet crimson. Miller crouched and touched it. It wasn't soil. It was flesh. A single sheet of pulsing membrane stretched across the ground, warm to the touch, faint vibrations running through it like nerves firing. Langley retched again. "What is this place?" Miller's voice was steady, only because someone had to be. We're inside something that wasn't meant to be entered. The fog around them thickened. And then they saw it. Up ahead, illuminated by a faint blue glow, rising from the membrane, stood a structure. A bunker. The same bunker they had seen in the real Harz Forest. Same stone, same doorway, same rusted lamps, same number on the side, Garz-IV, but wrong. Very wrong. The doorway was too tall. The walls curved inward at unnatural angles. The runes etched into the stone shifted subtly, like muscles twitching. Langley whispered, "Sir, that can't be the same place, it can't." "It's not," Miller said. "It's an echo, a copy. Something this place remembered, or consumed." They approached slowly. The bunker breathed. A low exhale of cold air drifted out of the doorway, smelling of stone, rot, and old metal. But beneath it lingered another scent, faint but unmistakable. Pine needles, earth after rain, the scent of the real forest. Langley's eyes widened. "It's a way home." "It might be," Miller said, "or it might be a trap." "It has to be a way home!" Langley rushed forward. "Langley!" Miller shouted, too late. The moment Langley's boot crossed the threshold, the ground pulsed violently, sending shockwaves through the membrane. The bunker door snapped shut with a slam that shook the valley. Then came the scream. Not from Langley, from the bunker. A horrible, metallic grinding shriek, like metal being torn apart while drowning. Miller grabbed the door handle and pulled. It didn't budge. Another scream, louder. Then silence. Utter silence. Langley's scream never came. Not once. He simply stopped existing. Miller's hands shook. He understood something then. Something Hagen had hinted at in his journal. The forest wasn't a location. It was a system, a collector, a memory vault, a sentient, ancient organism. The bunker had never been a way out. It was bait, a lure shaped from the memory of those who had entered before. Miller stepped back. "We're leaving the bunker. Now, no more thresholds." But the fog behind them had already changed. Where there had once been a path, there was now a wall, solid, unmoving, dense. The forest had sealed them in. Then, a crackling whisper floated from the tree line. "Sergeant Miller!" The voice came from every direction. Dozens of directions. Langley's voice, Dawson's voice, Harris's voice. Voices of men they had never met. Miller raised his rifle. "What do you want from us?" Silence. Then, in 100 overlapping voices. "Witness." The fog parted. Something emerged. It was not a creature, not a man, not a spirit. It was everything the forest had consumed, compressed into a single shape. A twisting silhouette of roots, bone fragments, fog tendrils, scraps of uniforms from different eras, faces forming and dissolving across its shifting surface. Some faces still had eyes, some didn't. Some whispered, some screamed. The being moved, without walking, gliding forward, the ground bending beneath it. Miller and the 2 remaining soldiers stepped back instinctively. "Sergeant," one whispered. "What is that?" Miller answered truthfully, "I don't know." The being stopped a few feet from them. A dozen faces surfaced across its chest, including Dawson's and Harris's, mouths opening in unison. "We are everything that enters. We are everything that remains. We are the forest beyond the gate." Miller's rifle shook in his hands. "Why us?" he demanded. "What did we do?" Another ripple of shifting faces. "You stepped inside." Miller swallowed hard. "And now? You kill us? Take us? Absorb us?" The being tilted its head in a disturbingly human gesture of confusion. Then the voices answered. "We do not kill. We do not hunt. We preserve." "Preserve what?" "All who cross the threshold." The being extended an arm, a long, swirling limb made of fog and bone, toward the soldiers. "Come, be remembered." Miller stepped back. No. The being paused, confused again. No, it repeated, as if tasting the concept for the first time. Miller's voice hardened. We refuse. The fog quivered. The ground pulsed. The entire forest reacted as though he had spoken a forbidden word. Voices rose from the fog, a cacophony of outrage, confusion, curiosity, hunger. The being trembled. You refuse. Then you must run. The ground convulsed. The fog exploded outward. The trees twisted violently. The forest screamed. And the chase began. The forest didn't wait. The moment the being spoke, the word run, the ground beneath Miller's boots cracked open in a spiderweb pattern, glowing faintly with that same blue-white pulse they'd seen at the monolith. The fog howled, a deep, guttural roar that sounded like 1,000 lungs inhaling at once. Move, Miller shouted. The men didn't hesitate. They sprinted blind into the fog, boots pounding the quivering ground. Branches lashed at their shoulders, roots curled around their ankles, pulling, clawing, trying to drag them into the earth itself. Behind them, something enormous moved. Not footsteps, not breathing. A shifting. Like the entire forest was uprooting itself to follow. The whispering voices rose in pitch, overlapping into a single, overwhelming tide of sound. Every tree groaned. Every stone vibrated. The fog thickened ahead of them and shattered behind them like glass. Private Wolf gasped. Sir, where are we going? Where? Forward, Miller barked. Just forward. Forward was the only direction left. The fog walls had reshaped themselves again, forming a narrowing funnel that bent around the forest in unnatural angles. Trees twisted overhead, knitting together into archways. The forest was forcing them somewhere, pushing them, hurting them. Sergeant! Wolf stumbled as a root coiled around his boot like a living serpent. Miller didn't. Stop! He turned back. He grabbed Wolf by the shoulders and yanked with all the strength he had left. The root stretched like a sinew, then snapped with a wet tear. The ground screamed, an actual scream, and the membrane soil convulsed violently. We're not leaving anyone, Miller roared. They ran harder. The air grew colder, then hotter, then colder again, time losing meaning, the world bending around them. Their watches spun. Their breaths no longer synced with their steps. Their shadows elongated in the wrong directions. Wolf panted, Sergeant, we're running in circles. No, Miller said through clenched teeth. The circles are running around us. They burst out of the fog into another clearing. Except it wasn't another. It was the same. The monolith stood ahead, black, cracked, glowing faintly like a dying ember. The circle etched into the stone throbbed with light, flickering like a heartbeat running out of rhythm. The forest was collapsing inward, and the being was coming. The silhouettes returned before the being itself, dozens of them, then hundreds, arranged in a perfect semicircle around the clearing, blocking every possible path. Their faces were blank voids. Their arms hung unnaturally straight. Their bodies twitched with tiny jerking movements, like puppets adjusting their strings. They were no longer simply watchers. They were sentinels, and they were waiting for one command. Behind them, the fog churned, then parted. The being emerged, larger than before, its body absorbing more faces, more fragments of uniforms, more bones. Dawson's face surfaced briefly across its torso. Harris's appeared along its shifting waist. It was growing, becoming a composite of every soldier it had consumed, everyone who had stepped into this world over the decades. The ground shook as it glided toward them. Miller and Wolf backed away until they were inches from the monolith. The being stopped 20 feet from them. Its voices spoke in perfect unison. Running changes nothing, Miller swallowed. His throat felt like ash. The being continued. You crossed the threshold. You are ours. You cannot return. But then, something happened. The monolith pulsed. A sharp, Sudden flare of white-blue light. The being recoiled. Just slightly. Just enough. "Sergeant," Wolf whispered, "it's afraid of the monolith." No, not afraid. Resistant. The monolith was not a gate. It was a lock. And they had broken it by entering the circle. Miller put it together in a single breath. "Hagen wasn't trying to use the circle," he whispered. "He was trying to contain it." Wolf looked at him, bewildered. "What?" "This world, this thing. It's older than Germany. Older than humanity, maybe. The Nazis didn't summon it. They stumbled onto it. And the circle was the only thing keeping the threshold closed." "And now it's open," Wolf realized. Miller nodded grimly. "And the monolith is the last failing barrier." The being drifted closer. The silhouettes leaned in. The fog pressed inward like a tightening throat. "Come," the being said. "Be preserved." Wolf clutched his rifle like a drowning man clutching air. "Sergeant, what do we do?" Miller looked at the monolith. It pulsed faintly. The rune circle on its face throbbed. A tiny crack spidered downward. The being saw it too. It extended a shifting arm toward the stone. "You do not belong in our memory. But you do not belong outside it now. We will correct this." And Miller understood the horror. If the monolith broke completely, the threshold wouldn't trap them. It would spread. Into the real hearts. Into the world. They couldn't let the being repair it. They also couldn't let it destroy it. The circle was fragile, powerful, and unpredictable. "Miller," Wolf choked. "What's the plan?" Miller steadied his rifle. His voice was calm, almost serene. "We go through the monolith." Wolf blinked. "What? No, Sergeant, that's suicide." "It's not a wall," Miller said softly. "It's a door. A failing, unstable door. Hagen built it to close the threshold. But thresholds open both ways." "You think it leads home?" "I think it leads somewhere that isn't here," the forest screamed. The being surged forward. The silhouettes broke formation. Wolf panicked. "We're dead! We're dead!" "No," Miller said. He grabbed Wolf by the collar. "We jump," and they did. They threw themselves against the monolith just as the being lunged, just as the fog roared, just as the silhouettes collapsed inward, just as the circle's light shattered like glass, and the world split open beneath them. There was no up, no down, no sense of direction, only falling, infinite falling, through a tunnel of twisting light and bending sound. Voices screamed around them, some human, some not. Some belonging to men who had crossed the threshold decades ago. Wolf shouted, but his voice was ripped apart into echoes. Miller tried to hold on to him. Their hands kept slipping. The light grew brighter, then darker, then blinding. And suddenly it stopped. Everything stopped. Miller hit solid ground. Grass. Real grass. Wet with morning dew. Cold. Normal. He gasped, rolling onto his back, staring at the sky. A real sky, blue, open, full of clouds that didn't look like faces. Birds chirped. Actual birds. He laughed. He cried. He didn't understand which he was doing. He sat up. He looked around. He was alone. "Wolf!" he called. No answer. "Wolf!" Nothing. He was in a forest, but not that forest. This one was bright, gentle, alive. He staggered to his feet, dizzy, but breathing. And then he froze. 20 feet away stood a wooden sign, weathered by rain, written in German, Harz National Park, Protected Area, 1947 Restoration Zone. Miller stared. His mouth went dry. 1947, 2 years after he had entered. But the world looked older than that. The trees taller, the paths worn. This wasn't 1947. This was decades later. Maybe more. Maybe many more. His heart raced. He stumbled toward the sign. And his boot hit something metal. He looked down. A dog tag, half buried in the soil. He lifted it. wiped the dirt, read the engraving. Private Wolf, U.S. Army Kia, 1945. His breath shattered. The forest behind him rustled. Slowly, softly. He turned. The fog drifted between the trees. Thin, gentle, almost curious. Like a stray memory that had followed him home. Miller backed away, shaking. "No," he whispered. "You stay where you belong. You stay—" The fog pulsed, then whispered, in a voice that was not one voice but many. "Witness." Miller ran, but the fog, thinner, weaker, quieter, kept pace. It wasn't done with him, not yet, not ever, because once you see the threshold sees you forever. The official story says nothing happened in the Harz. No portals, no occult stations, no missing American patrols swallowed by the woods. The maps show a national park, a hiking region, a place where families take photos beside old wooden signs. There are brochures, visitor centers, carefully marked trails. But then there's the file, a thin, unmarked folder that should not exist. It begins on a cold morning in October 1979, with a forest ranger named Klaus Richter. Klaus had walked the same route for 15 years. The Harz was his workplace, his church, his living room. He knew each path, each clearing, each crooked branch that looked like a bent finger in winter. So when he saw the man sitting on the fallen log, he knew at once, this man did not belong here. The stranger wore an old, faded U.S. Army jacket. Not the modern type Klaus had seen in magazines. An older cut. World War II era. Mud-stained. Torn at the sleeve. His boots were caked in dirt that didn't quite match the soil here. A darker, finer ash. He sat with his elbows on his knees, staring at his hands as if he hadn't seen them in years. His hair was gray, his face lined, his eyes hollow. But there was something else. He looked wrong for his age. Too strong, too intact, too recent. Klaus approached cautiously. "Guten Tag," he called. "Are you hurt?" The man looked up. His eyes were sharp, too sharp, like someone who had just stopped running after a very long time. He blinked at the trees, at the sky, at Klaus. "What year is it?" he asked in English. Klaus hesitated, then answered in broken English. 1979, October. The stranger's face cracked. Not in shock, not in joy, in acceptance. "As close as I thought," he murmured. Klaus helped him stand. His hands were steady. His posture was military. Around his neck, beneath the jacket, something metal glinted. Klaus didn't notice it until later. At the hospital, doctors asked for a name. He hesitated, then said, "Sergeant Daniel Miller, United States, Army." They asked when he was born. 1922, he replied. They asked when he had last been conscious. He stared out the window toward the Harz, where fog was beginning to rise between the trees. 1945, he said. No one believed him at first. When the doctors cut away his jacket, they found a dog tag on a chain. It was old, the metal worn, the lettering blunt with age. Miller, Daniel J. Sargent, U.S. Army Service. No, redacted Catholic. The hospital staff assumed he was a confused veteran, a man with dementia wandering the forest in an old jacket as some form of psychological loop. They apologized when he didn't know how to use a television remote. They smirked when he asked where the command tent was. They grew uneasy when he never once asked about modern events, only about the war, and about the Harz, always the Harz. A few days into his stay, a local historian visited him, curious about the lost sergeant the newspapers had briefly mentioned. The historian brought with him an old map of Allied operations. Miller traced a shaking finger to a circled spot. Here, he said. We were sent here. Coordinates matched a suspected facility, Garz-IV, experimental. Intelligence thought it was rocket research or radar. They were wrong, the historian frowned. There were no official records of an Allied patrol in that zone in 1945. Of course there weren't, Miller replied. We never came back. The historian laughed nervously and changed the subject. But that night, he wrote a letter, partly as a joke, partly as a reflex, to an address in West Germany that handled liaison with U.S. military archives. 3 weeks later, 2 men in plain suits walked into the hospital. They weren't journalists. They weren't tourists. They weren't interested in the scenery. They were interested in Sergeant Miller. The folder contains their report. It's dated 1983, stamped classified in thick black ink, later crossed out with a rubber stamp, declassified. Someone then wrote in the margin, in red pen, "This should never have been declassified." Inside, there are transcripts of interviews with Miller, pieces, not the full thing. They are labeled Subject, Miller, Daniel J. Case, Harz Anomaly. In one, an investigator asks, "You claim you entered the Harz Forest in March 1945 as part of a small reconnaissance patrol. How many men?" 5, Miller answers. "We found a bunker, Garz-IV, symbols, circles, something in the walls. And then we left," he says. "Except we didn't. We walked out of the bunker and into something that looked like the Harz, but older, deeper, wrong." "You're describing another dimension, Sergeant." "I'm describing a threshold," he replies. "A place the forest leads to if you step in the wrong way, or if it decides you shouldn't leave." In another transcript, the investigator presses him. "If time passed differently there, how did you survive?" "You say it felt like days. You emerged in 1979. That's 34 years. Miller hesitates. "It didn't feel like 34 years, he says. "It felt like one long night spread too thin." They ask him about the others. He doesn't answer for a long time. "The forest kept them," he says finally. "It remembers people. It preserves them in its own way." "Meaning?" "Meaning they never leave," Miller says. "Not really. Not completely." The most unnerving item in the folder isn't the transcript. It's the photograph. Black and white. Slightly blurred. Taken, according to the note on the back, by a German forestry worker in 1962, 17 years before Miller appeared. The photo shows a stand of trees in the Harz on a foggy morning. At first glance, nothing special. Trunks, mist, the gray smear of sky. But in the lower left corner, between 2 trees, stands a figure. Dressed in a World War II U.S. Army jacket, helmet, rifle, head turned toward the camera. The face is too blurred to identify, but the posture is unmistakable. Someone has circled the figure in red ink. Underneath, a note. "Compare with Miller's uniform on arrival. Identical pattern. Negative confirmed from original. No evidence of manipulation for 1962 tech." The implication hangs between the lines. Sergeant Miller was photographed in the Harz 17 years before he came back. Or someone who looked exactly like him. Or something wearing his face. The file jumps forward. Germany, 1990s. Unified now. The Harz is a tourist region. Hikers with backpacks and cameras walk the well-trodden trails. There are guidebooks, souvenir magnets, postcards. There are also missing persons reports. A hiker who stepped off the marked path and never returned. 2 students who went camping and vanished without a trace. A park ranger whose dog ran into a fog bank and never came back. The ranger followed and was never seen again. In each case, the local police wrote the same phrases. Got lost in poor visibility. Possible fall into ravine. No foul play suspected. In the margins of one report, someone, perhaps the same person who handled the old Miller file, wrote 3 words. Check for fog. In the early 2000s, a blurred camcorder tape appears. 3 friends filming their hike. Trees, jokes, laughter. Then fog. Thick, low, unnatural fog that seems to rise from the ground rather than descend from the sky. On the tape, one voice says, "Why is it so quiet all of a sudden?" Another answers, "Listen, do you hear that?" The third voice, closest to the camera, whispers, "Footsteps." The tape ends there. They were later found less than a kilometer from the trailhead, disoriented, dehydrated, convinced they had been walking for days. According to their watches, only 2 hours had passed. According to their bodies, it had been longer. None of them ever visited the Harz again. The final document in the file is short. No official letterhead, no signature. Just a paragraph, typed on an old machine. The Harz phenomena should not be understood as haunting or supernatural occurrence in the folklore sense. Available evidence points to an anomalous interaction between geography, perception, and time, possibly exploited by experimental activity during WWII, referred Garz-IV bunker, but not caused by it. Sergeant Miller's testimony, combined with photographic and anecdotal evidence, suggests the existence of a liminal zone, a threshold environment, that occasionally intersects with observable reality in the Harz region. Its behavior is partially responsive, possibly sentient, and appears to exhibit a strong preference for observation over immediate harm. Term used repeatedly by Subject Miller. It wants witnesses. Recommendation: restrict further investigation. Some doors, once found, tend to remember the hand that touched them. Someone has added a final handwritten note at the bottom. File closed. If this is a story, it is a dangerous one to keep telling. Today, tourists still walk the Harz trails. They take selfies with the mist in the background. They post photos of creepy fog and weird silence online. Some joke about German Blair Witch vibes and move on, but a few don't. They talk about hearing their own names whispered when no one was near, about seeing a soldier between the trees in a uniform decades out of date, about how, just for a moment, the forest felt less like a place and more like a presence. If you go there on a quiet day, away from the crowds, deep enough that the signs disappear and the paths thin out, you'll reach a part of the forest where the air feels heavier, thicker, a little too still. Your compass might stutter. Your phone might lose its signal for a second longer than it should. And if the fog starts rising from the ground instead of falling from the sky, if the sound of your footsteps seems to echo a half-second late, like someone is walking exactly where you're about to step, you might remember this story. You might think of a thin folder in some forgotten archive, marked Harz Anomaly, closed. And you might wonder, is the forest watching you? Or is it deciding whether to let you go?